B92, Serbia calling. The Magnificent! Serbia calling.
In 1995, the charity War Child released an album called Help. It featured some of the biggest and best artists of the time, including, amongst others, Oasis, Radiohead, Sinead O'Connor, the KLF, the Charlatans, Blur, Portishead, Nana Cherry and Paul Weller.
Come together right now.
It raised £1.25 million, and the proceeds went to help thousands of children caught up in the Bosnian conflict.
We've all the will in the world. Typing 40 lines.
The album itself was incredibly all recorded in a single day and released just a week later.
Raindrops keep falling on my head, just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed.
This September 2020 marks the 25th anniversary of Help, and the album is being re-released for the very first time on vinyl and on streaming platforms, so everyone can hear this remarkable collection of songs. But getting huge stars to record 20 songs in a day and then releasing them in a week wasn't easy, and there's an amazing story to be told about how it happened. That story includes car crashes, private jets, Tony Blair, Johnny Depp, John Lennon and a pregnant bear.
It's getting late now. He knows today that he will surely die.
So here then in this podcast, with a bit of help from people like Paul Weller and members of Radiohead, the Manic, Salad, the Charlatans and Blur, plus many of the people from behind the scenes, will tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth about the making of the greatest charity album of all time.
Today, Billy Joe McAllister jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge.
My name is Matt Everett and this is Help, the story of the War Child album. Episode 3, Disc 1. This is the very first thing you hear on Help. Disc 1, Side 1, Track 1.
While I was young, I thought I had my own key. I knew exactly what I wanted to be. Now I'm sure you bought it up every door. Lived in a bubble days.
This is the opening song on an album that includes brand new recordings from the Boo Radleys, the Stone Roses, Radiohead, Orbital, Portishead, Massive Attack, Suede, the Charlatans with the Chemical Brothers, Stereo MCs, Sinead O'Connor, the Levelers, Manic Street Preachers, Terrorvision, the KLF, Andrew Weatherall and David Harrow, Terry Hall and Salad, Nana Cherry and Trout, Blur, and a supergroup called the Smoking Mojo Filters. And this by Oasis.
We only get what we will settle for. While we're living, the dreams we have as children fade away. While we're living, the dreams we have as children fade away. While we're living, the dreams we have as children fade away. While we're living, the dreams we have.
This song, Fade Away, had appeared as the B-side to the Oasis single Cigarettes and Alcohol back in October 1994. Yes, this was the point when Oasis B-sides were more timeless than most people's A-sides. This version, however, was billed as by Oasis and friends. Those friends were Noel Gallagher's friends and Oasis fans Johnny Depp and Kate Moss, obviously. And this song was one of the very first tracks recorded. Noel and friends started work just after midnight on Monday, September the 4th, 1995. Some would suggest that those involved didn't wake up to do the session and merely stayed awake from the day before. I would never suggest that. Here's Tony Crean. If you haven't worked out who Tony is yet, then I suggest going back and listening to the previous episodes.
Noel got it straight away. I mean, Noel was, somebody who, known for a little bit of time. I'd seen him playing around since the early days. since the gigs at the Water Rats and little gigs up in Manchester, the Boardwalk and stuff. So, and got to know him well, really, and through the fact that I was working with Paul Weller, and he was a massive Paul Weller fan, it was one of those things where it was just there was a nice synergy going on at the time with a lot of mutual respect between musicians. So it was quite, and obviously one of the core aims of this at the time was to try and get Oasis and Blair on the same record, because for everything, all the other reasons that were going on at the time. And I thought, because that would be newsworthy, and that was, as an old press officer and working with Terry Hall and Anton and Rob Partridge, we were all working with the idea of what would be newsworthy, really. So, and it was obviously, from our point of view, it was easier to talk to Noel, and Noel got it straight away, as did pretty much everybody we ever spoke to. I mean, I think the important thing to recognise is that there were so many people who you didn't really have to persuade. They were all desperate to do something to help what was going on in the former Yugoslavia, because they were so shocked, like everybody was, at what they were seeing on the news. I don't remember really having to twist many people's arms to do anything, because I think everybody collectively wanted to do something, you know.
In the end, Noel Gallagher didn't stop for almost the entire 24 hours of the session, recording 2 tracks, this and a cover of the Beatles' Come Together, more of which later, as well as conducting interviews, attending photo sessions, and even dropping off Oasis' new version of Fade Away at Radio 1.
Like I said, Noel got it straight away and was really supportive. I mean, Noel was great. I remember even before we recorded, he'd come off a tour of Japan, and he'd got off a plane at about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I think it must have been the only day we could do a photo shoot for the NMA. And he literally just came straight off a plane, went home. I met him at his flat in Camden. He had a cup of tea, and then went straight back out again to go and do the photo shoot and the interview. And he couldn't do enough, really. He was absolutely fantastic. To say, he was great and really supportive. And obviously, you know, him and Weller have always had this great mutual respect between each other. So he was obviously very keen to come along and walk in down at Abbey Road as well. So sort of, I mean, definitely he was the first recording finished, I think, that day. He rang me up about 8 o'clock in the morning to say that they'd finished it. They'd started about a minute after midnight to make sure that they were first in. So, which was great. You know, it's a lovely way to start the day, to know that you got one track in anyway, you know. So
The Help album had begun. Track 2 is Oh Brother by the Boo Radleys. Recorded at Dave Stewart's rather posh church studios in Crouch End in London, this song was written specifically by guitarist Martin Carr for the occasion.
I don't know where you are, brother, there's one thing I wish, that we were together now. There must be more than this.
Here's Boo Radley's singer, Seiss.
The weird thing is that we didn't demo it at all. Now, as far as I remember, we didn't have much notice on this at all. It really was just a case of a scramble of management to get things together, you know, and of course then you needed a studio. So I think it was kind of calling in favours and whether you could clear a day in the studio, and the church in Crouch End came through for us. They were brilliant. And as far as I remember, I mean, I don't know whether Martin went away and actually wrote the song the night before, or whether it was one that he had knocking around, or whether it was something that he did, but he literally, you know, there were no demos, there were no nothing. We literally sort of sat down, the four of us, and I think there's footage of us somewhere in a quiet room in the church, and just he literally played the song.
Hold on. We never talked and grew apart.
The weird thing is that, I mean, I think for me when I listen to that vocal, it's very hesitant, and I'm actually learning the song as I'm singing it almost, you know. It's a really kind of, okay, I just about get this. So it was very quickly done. And then the whole process as well, you know, it wasn't just, it was a bit of a media event as well. So it was kind of, on the one hand, you were trying to actually do the creative thing and learn the songs and come up with stuff. And on the other hand, we were aware that there was a lot of film crews around, there were photographers, there were visiting journalists and stuff. So it was a kind of, it was a kind of multitasking day that was going on. what was really interesting is that we had the core recording kind of crew, I guess, who were Tim, our bass player, and the engineer who worked with us, Andy Wilkinson. They were there, and they were the desk boys. So whatever time you'd have walked in, you'd have seen them glued to the desk, and that was great because they were foundations, they were the backbone. And so at various points, the rest of us would kind of come in and go, oh, is it my bit? Martin would kind of float around in the background listening, making sure everything was kind of going in the way of the song. But at the same time, there was kind of, at one stage, Keith Allen and a film crew came down for, I don't know whether it was a Channel 4 thing or something, so suddenly the attention switches to them, so they were hanging around. And of course, at one point there was a visit to the local pub, I remember that. We were in the pub for a couple of hours. And then there must have been interviews going on as well. I'm fairly sure there were people from the NME and that kind of thing dropping in and out. Management, record company were there probably. So, I think it was a bit of a kind of, for us, it was a bit of a free-for-all because we were that kind of a party band, I think, when we were in the studio in London. People then did tend to just sort of drop in. So I don't think it's I think the main body of work probably got done quite late in the evening when that had all died down, and then we kind of probably pulled it all together. I think that's how you would have found it. But it was quite chaotic, I think. I remember that. And I remember the time constraint being there, hanging over us all day as well, because you had to get this thing recorded and mixed in a day, which we hadn't done for a long time.
But you still found time to go to the pub, even though you just had a day to do it.
Well, yeah, bizarrely. There was always time to go to the pub. It was just bizarre. I think about it now and think about how, we used to live our lives and basically, meet, whether it was a meeting, whether it was a recording or whatever, visit to the pub had to be in there some point, and that's how you lived our lives. It was strange to me now, but that was how it was done.
This was track 3, The Stone Roses, Love Spreads. This was the first single to be taken from the Stone Roses' 5 years in the making second album, Second Coming, which had been released some 10 months before. But let's be honest about this, the Stone Roses doing anything was a big deal. They were never a band to follow trends or walk the predictable path. The Stone Roses didn't do what anyone told them to. Guitarist John Squire had said he'd create the artwork for the album, and the band had committed to doing something in some way right at the start of the project. But this is a group who took over 5 years to record an album. Could they do a track they were happy with in just one day? Tony Crean.
Definitely not a band who did quick things quickly, but if you only have to listen to the lyrics on the first Stone Roses album to know that they're really bright lads with a real political sense, and a real sense of the world. And I think that was what clicked with them. This was something that was a real thing. It wasn't someone asking them to knock out a tune for, I don't know, a cover mount to go on the NME. It was something different. And so I think that was why it connected with them. And obviously, it was quite handy because they were in the studio quite a bit. They'd been there for some time. And but they got it.
And that's just what they did, entering Rockfield Studios in Wales, where they'd spent the majority of the previous 5 years, and they put this down live. Since the Second Coming, the Roses drummer Rennie had parted company with the band, and they'd enlisted Robbie Maddox and a new keyboard player, Nigel Ippinson. Don't get me wrong, I'd listen to Rennie drumming all day, every day of the year. But it's quite cool that this track is the only recording of this lineup of the Stone Roses, and it's pretty rowdy. There are stories behind nearly all the tracks on the Help album. The point being, people weren't just asked to hand over a song they had knocking about or couldn't find a use for. They were asked for new tracks, covers or originals, but music that had never appeared anywhere else, and of course all recorded in one day. The track that Radiohead delivered was entitled Lucky.
I'm on a roll this time.
Radiohead guitarist Ed O'Brien.
1995, we were basically touring. We brought out the Bends that year back in April. And it was, I think, it's funny thinking about that year. That was the first year that I think we felt really good about ourselves. And I think because we had an album out and that we really loved, and we were touring it. We opened up for REM, we did big tours with them. We did a lot of stuff. And we were also, constantly working on new material, and we were in, bands had these purple patches. So we did a load of B-sides for singles that year for like Street Spirit. We did, and that summer they turned out really well. And Tom would, it was that thing when you sometimes get with a band, Tom would, in sound checks, that was our moment to really try and work in some, or play some new material. So Tom might start playing something he was working on, usually with an acoustic guitar, and I remember, I think we were touring in Japan, and we just he started up and we just sort of fell into it. And it's those, when a band is like really functioning really well, sort of what goes in comes out even stronger. And I think Lucky was just one of those songs. We were in a real purple patch, and sort of everything that we were doing, we were excited about. And it was all about, let's just keep recording stuff. Let's keep playing stuff, new stuff, alongside the stuff from the Bends. So yeah, it was never going to be a cover. It was always going to be, what's our best song? What's our best song right now?
Lucky was a huge moment for Radiohead. It was part of a shift, the moment they moved from performing the Bends album to working on what would become OK Computer. Although, and this is kind of interesting, it would be around a year before Lucky appeared on that album. They gave it away to War Child, a pivotal song for the band. Terry Hall from Hall & Nothing PR.
We were sitting in the office because we did Radio's press as well. And we were sitting there thinking, to give this away to a charity record is a real measure of what's to come. So without my War Child hat on, just being a Hall & Nothing PR who looked after the band's press, thinking, if they can give this away, goodness, what's coming? If they're confident. And it wasn't until it was 97 the follow-up album came. But I was smacked by the whole, how generous they were, because we were like, we can't believe they're giving what must be one of the best tracks on a new album, although we haven't heard it. But to give us that for charity was just phenomenal. It's an incredible song.
It's gonna be a glorious day.
Yeah, it's all part of that thing that, I feel like that whole year, when you look back on it, it was when we sort of making the Bends and the odd track on the Bends, like, I don't know, Planet Telex, for example, the first track. It was our first steps in going widescreen. Before that, where we'd come from, it was kind of, if you think of Creep and everything, it was very sort of direct. But that whole year was us going widescreen and playing with sounds and just expanding. And I think also the other thing that's interesting is that I think what happens is the venues, we were playing bigger venues. So if you were sound checking a track that was more kind of, if you like, more aggressive and more direct and guitar, like, something typical of, Pablo Honey and maybe the guitar aspects of the bends, it didn't sound so good in the bigger venues. But the moment we played something like Lucky, which had a lot more space in it, and it was more, as I said, widescreen, it suddenly was like, oh, this sounds great in this space. So it was just a very, very natural transition. And we were constantly on the road. We were either, if we weren't touring, we were in the studio doing a B-side, or, you know, so it was just this great period for us. It's totally that thing, and you realise as a band, it's like the 3-guitar distorted guitar onslaught sounds pants in a big arena, you know, and I think, and that was the big, you know, I can't underestimate the importance of our, you know, us opening up for REM, that was their Monster tour, and that they sort of guided us literally by just being kind and chatting to us and allowing us to do it, and it was a very natural learning space. So it is that thing, you suddenly work out what works in bigger spaces, and it's less bombardment. You can have moments of it, but it's more about texture and atmospheres and also light and shade, you know, dynamics, bringing it up, bringing it down. It was a massive deal. Yeah, it was huge, and it was really exciting. And I think for us as well, it was so great to be part of something that seemed really, really worthwhile. And then I guess the other thing for us was, like, people really liked the track Lucky. It was like, that for us was a kind of a validation, because you have to remember, we were that's what we were seeking. We'd spent 3 years validating from 1992 when the NME wrote us off as kind of, you know, pathetic specimens, and so we'd sort of been, you know, and then Pablo Honey, and then people wrote us off as a one-hit wonder. So it was kind of clawing back some kind of, I don't know, it felt good. It felt validation of what we were doing, and people weren't going, oh, it's Radiohead, that pathetic lot from Oxford. It was like, oh, actually, you know what, they can write some songs, they can, you know, they can do it.
Orbital submitted a brand new track called Adnan. It was created partly using samples from the TV news on September the 4th, which showed NATO forces launching airstrikes against Serbian positions. Adnan was a young man, a boy. His family was evacuated from the former Yugoslavia, but his father had to stay behind to work. So his 16-year-old son, Adnan, decided he had to go back and stay with him to keep him company.
In a few minutes, not triple.
He didn't want to leave me. He was supposed to go. I can't leave my daddy alone, he said.
After only a few days, Adnan was blown up and killed. In August 1995, Channel 4 had shown a short film for War Child, directed by Jeff Barrow from Portishead and edited by Steve Haley. Here's Adrian Utley from Portishead.
You know, Jeff got somebody to edit some film together of like a juxtaposition of Yugoslavia pre-war and post or during, and it was really good actually. And we did some music which was flipping between the two sides of it. So even with that, very like Rwanda in a way. You hear about it, but actually the reality of it is somehow quite removed. We were definitely aware of it, but I don't think to the extent that, well, I don't think anyone was really aware to the extent of things that have come out, mass slaughters and that have come out over the years. So I was aware of it, as many people were, but War Child definitely highlighted the situation, and we were really, really very into doing something to help for that.
Did I see a moment with you in a half-lit world? I'm frightened to believe.
The track that Portishead recorded for Help was this, Morning Air. Adrian Utley.
I remember being in the studio, and then I don't even know who told me who it was. I don't remember the actual moment of knowing about that, because we were always up to something then. There was always something going on. We'd already had a very small idea for this track. It was hanging around as a small idea, and we developed it massively. There was a few things that we were looking at doing. We were working on remixes. Actually, Jeff does more remixes, but I was in there working on quite a few of them with him, playing and stuff. And we were just kind of getting ideas together for various things. And I think that actually this might have been a slight idea for a film that we were asked to work on, but we weren't particularly into it. So it was an idea that was there, but it was very, very embryonic. And once this was mentioned as a thing, that we could work on, that would be, is a good thing to do. Obviously, we sort of pulled in that track, and really kind of got on with it. I remember playing the bass line on a fretless bass, because that's all I had at that time. I've just owned up to that. Sorry, got a fretless bass. That's it. I think Jeff had already got that kind of piano idea going and a beat, and we just, jumped on it and got it going. And then Beth worked on it. That's as I remember it. I can remember it actually very vividly in terms of standing around playing and talking about it and getting it together, more so actually than quite a few tracks that we've done over the years.
I feel this fear alone until we have total honesty. I tremble.
If I was to kind of visit the studio at that point, I walk in the door, what would I find?
Well, you would be shocked by the amount of smoke that was going on in there, actually. Cigarette smoke, I have to add. Although I think we'd all given up by then. When we were making Dummy, I remember Beth coming in and just couldn't actually breathe in the room because we'd all been three of us smoking in there. And then Beth added to that. So that's the first thing you would have noticed, I think. And we would have had to open a window, or the door. Well, there wasn't a window. We'd have to open the door to let the bonfire out. And that would be the first thing. And then there'd be us sitting around laughing about stuff. There was a lot of that. And then massive, frenetic amounts of work going on. Incredible noise. Ideas really sometimes really flowing, and then great big periods of apathy. Not apathy, just stuck kind of thing. Or actually, in studios, I don't know, I've done sessions where things are really happening fast, and that's on like very paid sessions, and everybody's got to kind of get it going, but then there's often other sessions where there's great big times when you don't do anything, and they're kind of really necessary to reset your brain in some way and talk about rubbish, tell jokes, you know what I mean? And it's a little bit like being at school where somebody starts a red herring and you think, oh, thank God we're off on that one. That's brilliant. We don't have to do the work, because you're actually trying to find this thing, and sometimes it's completely exhausting, you know. So that would, you would probably, and then other times you'd come in and you'd be so loud you'd have to hold your ears, and you know, we'd be firing and shouting and doing stuff and pulling wires across the room, and you know, it was a very fertile time.
All great albums are sequenced really well. This means the order that the songs are put in, and this is hugely important. It's something that bands obsess and argue about for months. One of the many remarkable things about Help was that the sequencing was done kind of as the record was being made, but it still works. Portishead are followed by Massive Attack, who contributed this new version of their classic single, Karma Coma.
You sure you wanna be with me? I've nothing to give. Don't lie and say this loving's best. Don't leave us in emotional pace. Take a walk, take a rest. Now take a rest.
I seen you digging a hole, your neighborhood. You're crazy, but you're lazy. No need to live in a lane to. Your troubles must be seen to. See through money like it's paper. With faces I remember. I drink on a daily basis, though it seldom cools my temper. It never cools my temper.
There are some great cover versions on the Help album. Track 8 was a song written in 1982. The lyrics are by Elvis Costello and the music's by Clive Langer. It's about the Falklands War, specifically the life and prosperity that returned to the British shipyards as they built new battleships for the Falklands conflict. The very same ships that would carry the area's young men to war, some never to return. It's about senseless waste of life. Robert Wyatt released a version, and it's amazing. Elvis Costello's own recording is too. And remarkably, Suede delivered an interpretation that manages to stand shoulder to shoulder with both of them. No small achievement.
Is it worth it? A new winter's coat and shoes for the wife, and a bicycle on the boy's birthday. It's just a rumor that was spread around town by the women and children. Soon we'll be shipbuilding. Well, I ask you.
The collaborations on the Help album were yet one more thing that made it very special. One meeting of minds was the Charlatans and the Chemical Brothers, people who had gone to work a lot after Help. The Chems helped create the Charlatans' epic track One to Another, but this marked the point that their relationship as friends turned into co-conspirators in the studio. Here's Tim Burgess from the Charlatans and how he first met Tom Rowland and Ed Simmons from the Chems.
Okay, the story starts with Tom and Ed at the Albany on Great Portland Street, and the Heavenly Social had a night on a Sunday. Then you could only drink until 10 o'clock, so it was an afternoon, early evening thing, and the Chems DJ'd every night, and I went to, if there was 13, I went to all 13. And the first night there was hardly anybody there, and then the second night there was queues all around the block. It was like, you know, the best thing that I'd sort of like been a part of. So I felt really connected to it. I met them and just was talking to them, and they had done a remix of a Charlatan song, and I didn't really, you know, I really enjoyed it, but I didn't know, I'd never met them. So when I met them, I just became friends with them, and then they asked me to sing on their album.
So their choice of song was a cover of Sly and the Family Stone's A Time for Living.
Time for living, time for giving, no time for making
one of the reasons why we chose it was because the Beastie Boys had done a cover version of it, and it was like a kind of punk version of Time for Living. And, you know, we were all aware of both versions. I'd DJ quite a lot with Tom and Ed. I used to DJ before them in Sweden, and we went on tour together, Kems and me and Martin Kelly from Heavenly. Just used to, you know, just be inspired by records and talk about records, and always played Beastie Boys, Check Your Head, and that track. We all decided that we would give up our day jobs and just like live in Sweden. But we did come back and we recorded a track for Help. And therefore it felt quite natural to do, you know, that.
Time for living, time for giving.
It was 24 hours. There was lots of interviews before, you know, I remember The Independent being there and The Observer, you know, turning off an interview. And when you're in that moment, you just do the best that you can and hope that, you know, everything's on your side because of the good intentions towards the track. You know, the Chems came from their busy times and, you know, busy schedule. And I think they came to kind of like the process, you know, they'd remix us in the past and in the future they would go on to do one to another. So they kind of produced it. But this was a different thing. We started the track, and then they came in and messed around with it in the middle, and then, you know, played some of their stuff over the top of it. And then we did some more recording, and it was just, and then the vocals kind of went on last. And I know that there was a drink called Hooch that was kind of like, that was like they'd sponsored our whole session, or not sponsored it, but, you know, provided us with, you know, just limitless amounts of hooch. So we were pretty tipsy by midday, and we hadn't even started yet. But and then that went on for that. It was a 24-hour session, and then we had a gig the next day, which I don't remember at all. So it was just squeezing it in between everything. Charlatans had just gone to #1 with the Charlatans album. You know, it's pretty heady times, to be honest.
Incidentally, according to the War Child archive, Tim Burgess stated that he'd initially planned to cover Hawkwind's Silver Machine, but Lemmy, yes, that Lemmy, who wrote the song, said no. So does Tim remember speaking to him about it?
I don't remember that. If that is true, it probably would have been amazing, and we should try and do it again.
There wasn't really a conventional A or B side to the album, but the lovely vinyl reissue comes in 2 discs, so track 10 is the end of side 2, so we're halfway in. And the song that marks that point is the Stereo MC's Sweetest Truth, Show No Fear. The Stereo MCs merit some kind of award for cutting it very fine as they headed into their respective studios only a few hours before the midnight deadline. The band recorded the track mostly at Workhouse Studios in London's Old Kent Road, a remarkable feat, not least because when it comes to taking your time between releases, they make the Stonehouses look positively proactive. The gap between the Stereo MC's massive hits Connected and Deep Down and Dirty and this song, an astonishing 10 years. Then one song written, recorded and delivered in 24 hours. Respect, as they say, is due.
Must be the sweetest truth, struggling to believe it. Run on along.
10 songs in and another 10 to go, and that 10 includes a beautiful rendition of Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, the return of the KLF, Nina Cherry is in the house, and we find out how you bag yourself a Beatle. All that to come in part 4 of Help, the making of the War Child album. Since the Help album was released in 1995, support from music fans has enabled War Child to reach millions of children whose lives have been torn apart by conflict. Today, with the added threat of coronavirus, War Child's work is more important than ever. You can help them be there for more children and their families by making a donation today. Please go to warchild.org/help25. This has been a Cup and Nuzzle production for War Child, and this is the point where we do have to say that a mix of timings and schedules and lockdown restrictions means that we couldn't get everyone who wanted to be included in the series. Massive roll call of love coming at the very end of this series. I've been Matt Everett. See you next week. Thanks for listening.